Allora, buongiorno a tutti, direi che possiamo iniziare, siete tutti seduti. Allora, innanzitutto permettetemi di dire che è un onore per me e per noi in qualche modo aprire le danze di Biennale Democrazia 2019 e per questo ci tengo a iniziare con un ringraziamento agli organizzatori di Biennale Democrazia che hanno scelto di adottare la mostra quelle e di adottare in qualche modo l'India e una serie di tematiche legate all'India per aprire la rassegna di Biennale Democrazia e di invitare Alpa, Shah e Lerche da Londra per venire a discutere tutta una serie di temi che in qualche modo la mostra apre, la mostra pone e che sono però degni di essere approfonditi. I ringraziamenti e i discorsi introduttivi sono già stati fatti e il rettore che era annunciato è dovuto andare via per impegni istituzionali, però chi di voi era fuori ha potuto insomma, già sentire l'introduzione della mostra, per cui non mi dilungherò su questo. Ci tengo però a dire due parole prima di passare la parola al Pasha Jenslerk, perché credo che la mostra ci porti subito nel cuore del tema di questa edizione di Biennale Democrazia, che è visibile e invisibile, e lo fa affrontando una questione di vitale importanza anche per in qualche modo discutere l'idea di democrazia. E la questione fondamentale è chi paga il prezzo delle politiche di sviluppo economico oggi? Quali settori della popolazione, pur partecipando del progresso, partecipando dello sviluppo economico, di fatto non usufruiscono, ma in qualche modo ne pagano un prezzo maggiore di altri. E credo che questo sia un tema centrale da affrontare ed è un tema che la mostra affronta in maniera molto diretta e molto forte, anche molto esplicativa, sia dal punto di vista visivo attraverso le fotografie, sia nel racconto che i pannelli esplicativi della mostra fanno, guidando le persone attraverso le fotografie. È già stato detto, ma ci tengo a ripeterlo per chi non era fuori all'inaugurazione, che la mostra è molto interessante perché in particolare ciò che viene messo in mostra, ciò che viene mostrato e reso visibile al pubblico, cioè le fotografie, sono il risultato di anni e anni di ricerca sul campo da parte di un team di ricerca coordinato da Alpa Shah, che è un'antropologa della London School of Economics, e da Jens Lerche, che è geografo sociale della School of Oriental and African Studies di Londra, che ha un progetto di ricerca che ha coinvolto molte persone, di cui poi Alpa e Jens parleranno, e che insieme hanno lavorato in varie zone dell'India, zone in cui in qualche modo in questi anni sono diventate al centro, sono state messe al centro di alcune dinamiche che riguardano le politiche di sviluppo economico in India, ma che allo stesso modo hanno portato alla luce che lo sviluppo economico e certe politiche di sviluppo di fatto concorrono nell'aumentare la discriminazione e l'esclusione di ampi settori della popolazione. Per cui il titolo della mostra è molto esplicativo e partirei da questo con Alpa Jens. Il titolo della mostra è Behind the Indian Boom. Cosa c'è dietro al boom economico indiano? Allora credo che già sono comparse alcune fotografie significative. Il dialogo, la discussione che avremo con Alpa e Jens oggi sarà accompagnata da alcune fotografie che aiuteranno anche a spiegare un pochino in maniera più diretta le tematiche di cui parliamo. Allora io inizierei chiedendo ad Alpa e Jens innanzitutto, behind the Indian boom, cos'è il boom economico? Che cos'è il boom economico indiano e perché l'India in particolare? Cosa ci può raccontare l'India oggi delle politiche di sviluppo economico?
Thank you, Tommaso. The story that we tell today is quite a tragic one. It's not necessarily unique to the Indian case, though there are definitely Indian particularities. What makes India particularly interesting in recent years is that the story of the modern Indian nation state is a story which started with the Indian independence in 1947. At that time, India was imagined to be a modern, secular, democratic, and even a socialist nation. There were many positive policies that were put in place to deal with historic inequalities in India, historic inequalities of caste and tribe, which we will explain in a short while. But what happened from the 1980s is that India opened it was quite a protectionist state, so it had quite a closed economy. But in the 1980s, it opened its arms out wide to economic policies of economic liberalization, to welcoming in multinational corporations, to welcoming in Coca-Cola, McDonald's, all these things which didn't exist in India before started to come in. And you might think that this is a wonderful thing. India is now, as you see in this first picture at the top right-hand corner, the land of opportunities. That picture is taken, that is in the Indian Prime Minister at the Gujarat Trade Fair, which took place. It takes place every year, but this one was taken by Alice Tilche, one of the researchers who has an affiliation with our program. It's seen as a land of opportunities, and there's a big trade fair welcoming in, nations around the world to come and invest in India. It's a land where money apparently grows. There's an accompanying photo to that picture which shows, this land where money grows. It's a land of boom. So the Indian economy has grown at an astonishing rate. 7% has been a kind of average growth figure for at least the last decade, if not more. And India has given rise to a huge, extraordinary amount of wealth. So there are now $100 billionaires in India, and they live with incredible property and assets and wealth. So you can have a look at this picture of this building here on the left-hand side. This building is the residential property of one of India's richest man. His name is Mukesh Ambani of Reliance Industries, which was based in Gujarat. But where this property now is like 60 stories high, and it's his house, and it's the world's most expensive residential property after Buckingham Palace. But people like Mukesh Ambani, they not only have houses like this back in India, they also have houses back in London's Kensington and Mayfair, some of the most expensive residential areas of London. But the tragedy of the story is that while you see this boom and you see this extraordinary growth everywhere across India, at the same time, you also have people who are sleeping on the streets, literally side by side at the bottom of the streets where this property is based. People in India who cannot afford to have a house or a roof above their heads. So it's a story of extreme economic growth, but it's also been a story of inequality. So India's top 1% of the population now holds 73% of the country's wealth. But poverty remains a huge issue in India. 58% of the population is still living below the international poverty line. And while much of the world's attention is focused on marveling at India's economic growth rates, the boom that it's experiencing, what we wanted to show through our research and through this exhibition is what lies behind this boom. And this is the story of extraordinary widening inequalities, of people living at the bottom end of society who are servicing this Indian economic boom. The fact that more than 90% of India's working population works in informal, casual labor jobs, which is very precarious. They have no job contracts, they have no security, no insurances, no health insurances, no pensions. They can be hired any moment, but then they can also be fired at any moment. So this is extraordinary precarious conditions of work, and majority of the Indian population are living under these circumstances. And we wanted to show life from this grassroots perspective, what life look like, the experiences of work, the experiences of people's struggles on the ground. And that was one of the focuses that we wanted to bring to you today.
If I should just add a couple of figures to this, then India is now officially, well, according to the Oxfam Inequality Report, even more unequal than, say, the UK. The UK is one of the most unequal societies in Europe. So that is where it ranks. It wasn't like that always. It wasn't like that in the 1980s, etc. So the situation in India is that the richest 1% earn more than half of the wealth in India. And if you take the top 9 billionaires in India, their wealth is equivalent to the wealth of the bottom 50% of the population. It's a hugely unequal society. And if we're looking at figures such as standard World Bank poverty figures, then close to 60% of the population is below the standard poverty line as it's being used for middle income countries. It is hugely unequal. It's maybe also interesting to compare it to China, because in China, China is of course the factory of the world. India has had even higher growth rates than China in the last decades. So its economy is growing faster. What's happening with that growth? Well, it's not primarily benefiting the poor people. We don't know what's happened with poverty in India since 2011, because the government has not published any figures. They used to publish figures every 4 or 5 years. They haven't done it since then. It's probably fallen a bit, but it's probably not fallen a lot. Now, average wages in India, if you take a wage such as that in the garment industry, is about 25% of what international observers call the living wage in India. So, whereas in China, the wages used to be even lower than they were in India. In 2001, in garment, they were lower. In 2011, wages had increased in China by more than 100%, and they're now a good deal higher than in India. So the trajectories in the factory of the world and the trajectories in India for the working population is quite different, even though growth in India is actually higher than it is in China.
Can I add to just the significance of this? So one of the important things that you have to bear in mind is that the proponents of this form of growth, they claimed that this growth is going to trickle down to everyone. That's the premise upon which this project of development, of modernization, of economic growth has been based. And this is not an Indian story, you know, as I said earlier, it has emerged from Washington, you know, from the high towers of economic economics faculties around the world, in the US especially, where, so this is a World Bank, IMF sponsored story of it's a story of neoliberal economic growth, which has been generated in the universities. So the proponents of this form of economics, claim that eventually it's a trickle-down effect, so finally that this growth, its benefits will eventually, benefit everybody. And that's still the overriding story. The overriding story is that eventually things will turn out for the better for everybody. And I guess what we're trying to do today is to question that overriding narrative by showing how that growth is experienced from the bottom up.
If I should just add to these two pictures that we see here, the one on the left are construction workers in Delhi. When you're a construction worker, you tend to live at the construction sites or near the sites under conditions as what we can see there. Construction matters. The construction sector is the fastest growing sector in India. To the extent that there have been new jobs coming, and there haven't been many, it is well known that the growth in India has been what is called jobless growth. In fact, in the last 2 years, there's been a fall in employment in India even, but till then it has been by and large jobless growth. But where there has been new jobs has been primarily in the construction sector. So it's those kind of working jobs that have been created that we can see there. The other picture is living conditions of people working in brick kilns. Brick kilns is another, you may say, traditional industry, which is very labor intensive, and which of course, the more construction growth, the more you need of bricks. And there we see conditions under which brick kiln workers live in the countryside at the kilns where they work 9 months a year.
Grazie. Ricollegandomi proprio a ciò che è stato detto prima da Alpa e poi da James nella fine dei loro discorsi, vorrei aggiungere 2 cose lanciando a loro un tema di discussione e di approfondimento. La prima questione è proprio sul modello di sviluppo. Alpa Shah ha giustamente detto che chi ha proposto questo modello di sviluppo, che è stato adottato ormai praticamente in tutto il mondo, sosteneva e continua a sostenere che questo modello di sviluppo, questo tipo di crescita economica finirà per beneficiare tutti, quasi naturalmente, senza bisogno di politiche di gestione della ricchezza. Io credo che la storia indiana, che uno dei modi in cui la storia indiana degli ultimi 10-15 anni possa parlare anche a noi in maniera molto diretta è proprio su questo tema qua, che è il fallimento invece. È la dimostrazione che lo Stato, adottando questi modelli di sviluppo, ha fallito nel prendersi cura delle fasce più svantaggiate, più povere della popolazione. E credo che questo sia un tema che emerge molto fortemente dalla mostra, che vedrete verrà fuori anche nel prosieguo di questa conversazione. E proprio su questo mi ricollego invece a quanto anche James raccontava sul settore delle costruzioni, sui lavoratori nel settore delle costruzioni. Perché? Perché un numero sproporzionato ormai di lavoratori in India lavora lontano dalla propria casa. Ma non lontano dalla propria casa perché sono migranti, ma lontano dalla propria casa perché migrano ma in maniera stagionale, sono una forza lavoro che circola costantemente da un luogo all'altro. E che quindi è lontano dalla propria casa ma non ha una casa in realtà, perché a casa non ci torna quasi mai, e vivono sui siti dove si lavora, per cui sui cantieri o, così passo anche alle fotografie successive, nei campi di lavoro, e girano a seconda delle stagioni dove la necessità di forza lavoro non qualificata e a basso costo è maggiore. E su questo chiederei, il secondo tema che mi piacerebbe affrontare con loro oggi è proprio quello della discriminazione della forza lavoro. Perché io credo che i temi della discriminazione non siano solo su base economica, e l'India ne è la dimostrazione. Chi è alle fasce più basse della popolazione, i lavoratori più esposti, più svantaggiati, non sono solo economicamente discriminati, ma sono discriminati da tanti altri punti di vista. Allora vorrei chiedere a voi se si possono affrontare alcuni di questi temi.
Thanks for that question. Well, these two pictures are pictures I've taken from North India. They are Dalit workers that work with sugarcane harvesting. I'll explain a bit about what that means, because that relates to social discrimination. But first, let me just add that in India, 92% of the population work in informalized jobs, or either they're employed or they're self-employed, but they have no labor contracts, they have no security, they have no pension. If they fall ill, they have to deal with themselves. That is the standard for everyone working in India, apart from the few working for the government or the few working at the top end of private companies. Even if you work for a private top company, it is very likely that you will work under the same conditions as under informal conditions with no rights, because that is the trend, that even formal companies are changing their workforce into informal laborers. So that is the general condition. Now, as Tommaso points out, or asks, there are indeed a segregation of the workforce. There are certain people that tend to get the worst jobs across India. And that has to do with what India historically was. Caste has been a major organizing principle of the Indian economy for centuries, for thousands of years, where caste are basically kinship groups that are organized hierarchically, and where certain groups are considered untouchable. In religious sense, they perform tasks that are polluting religiously, and therefore they are treated as if they cannot, that even their touch up is polluting. They were historically discriminated against, so in the sense of not being able to share water, food, not having, living in segregated parts of villages. And of course, this was all a system that also ensured that these people were available for the worst kind of work that existed. They were little better than slaves. These are the Dalits, or Dalit is a modern political term that means either the oppressed or the broken people. There are different translations, but that is the term they prefer themselves. Classically, they were called the untouchables. Now they're called ex-untouchable because untouchability is, formally speaking, outlawed. They consist around 16% of the population, 200 million people. In addition to that, there are the tribal people, the Adivasis, that Alpa probably will talk more about, but people living in outside of the main caste Hindu society, mainly living in the forest of the interior parts of India. They constitute another 8-9% of the population, or around 100 million. They were treated as not proper citizens of India, and therefore also low. Now, if we're looking at the kind of work people have today, then it is very clear from our work and also from Indian statistics that both Dalits and Adivasis are concentrated in the worst kind of jobs that is available in India. By the overwhelming proportion of workers in brick kilns, for example, are Dalits and Adivasis. Construction, they dominate. Take any sector, take the people cutting stones, take people working in low-end jobs, even in modern industries. Take people working with sanitation work, rubbish work, which is also considered polluting. It is these groups you find there. In the modern sectors, the worst kind of work is also done by these groups. Our research show how from the tea plantations in Kerala, as are shown in the photos, to the industries of Tamil Nadu, across India, the worst jobs are performed by these groups.
Just to provide a little bit more context as well. So one of the big myths about this kind of economic growth is that it was not only going to trickle down to everybody, but also that things like caste or tribe discrimination, which, as Jens explained, have a long history in India, these kinds of forms of discrimination would eventually also wither away with development. So those old hierarchies, those old forms of discrimination, of oppression, would also disappear. And what we could see from the work of progressive economists in India was that, in fact, if you looked at the statistical figures of poverty, everywhere across the country, Dalits and Adivasis, those people who were historically seen as untouchable, and Adivasis, who were, India's indigenous or tribal people, these two groups of people, they consist of many different kinds of people, many different groups. We'll hear a bit more about them in a bit. But these two kind of categories of people were across the nation, more than gender or region or other circumstances. If you were a Dalit or Adivasi, you were inevitably going to be amongst the poorest of the people. So these figures, we saw these figures from the work of progressive economists in a big surveys that were done in 2007. And when we looked at these, we thought, well, what's going on here? It's really important to see how what life might be like and how it might be changing for Adivasis and Dalits to see what this trickle down looks like from the grassroots. So we devised this program of research whereby several anthropologists were going to live amongst Adivasi and Dalit communities in different parts of the country. So the work that you see in the exhibition, the core of this work was actually the research that came from the work of 5 postdoctoral researchers who had all previously worked on inequality, on Adivasis, Dalits, or on issues of exploitation and oppression in India, who had all had long-term experience of doing first-hand field research, and they went back, some of them to different sites, some of them to their previous sites, and they went to study what's happening from the perspective of Dalits and Adivasis in their different sites. So what we had is a picture of India, which was a picture that emerged from the Kerala tea plantations. So these are the plantations which produced tea that we consume back in England. That was tea that we had actually in our breakfast room table today in the hotel where the Biennale hosted us. These are the people who plucked the tea. Historically, these people were Dalits, were people who were seen as untouchables. And at the time of British colonial rule, India was a British ruled by the British, they took Dalits from a neighboring state in Tamil Nadu and they displaced them onto these plantations in the state of Kerala, these highlands, and they made them clear the land in order to plant trees. They made them clear the trees in order to plant tea bushes. And then they were there as indentured. They worked like slaves for centuries. And then as time went on, they gained some modicum of rights. They gained a little bit of security in their jobs. They gained some kind of housing. they made some communities in the tea plantations of Kerala. I mean, these were still very, very marginal, the rights that they had. But then, with the liberalization of the economy, all these rights that they had gained, whatever little they had, they lost. They began to lose them. And not only that, as they started to refuse to work on those plantations, what the multinational companies that now took over the tea economy did is bring labor, migrant labor, from the middle of India, the places where I worked, Jharkhand, for example, to travel to the tea plantations, where they were given work only for 8 months of the year and then chucked out back into having to return to where they came from, and they were worked even harder than the Dalits. They had no rights at all. So we saw these processes emerging in the tea plantations of Kerala. We saw them in the paper factories in Telangana in the middle of India, where Adivasi land was taken over to build a paper factory, and how Adivasi and Dalit labor got the worst jobs in the factories, and how the dominant caste, the higher caste, took the best jobs. We saw these processes in Tamil Nadu, where a chemical industrial belt was set up from the 1980s, polluting the entire landscape, but where the Dalits who lived on the lands were then incorporated as casual labor, doing the most polluting of jobs. So, for example, in the site where Brendan Donegan, one of the postdoctoral researchers who was part of the project, worked, he lived in a village which was on the edge of a factory making bones, crushing bones to make gelatine. And bone crushing, these are cow bones brought in. It's a very, very dirty, very chemically toxic work. And it was all the Dalits that had lived in those villages who were doing that work. And of course, they were not given proper jobs. They were just hired on on contracts, and on which had no security whatsoever. And when they started to rise up, and when they started to protest against their conditions of work, when they started to protest, against the pollution on their doorstep, what did the companies do? They brought in migrant labor from the middle of India, again from, Jharkhand, Orissa, Bihar, and they brought them to basically replace these protesting workers. Now this, of course you will realize this story is not an Indian story, it's a story everywhere. It's probably happening right here, in parts of Italy. But yeah, so what I think our research in different parts of the country showed is, the myth of this story of caste or tribe discrimination going away with economic development. In fact, what is happening is new kinds of discrimination, drawing on the old forms of discrimination, are being regurgitated, are being perpetuated in the modern economy. And in some cases, people are facing new kinds of stigmas, new stigmas of untouchability, which they might not even have experienced before in the modern economy.
Prima di chiedere ad Alpa o a Jens se vogliono spiegarci il video, dire due parole, prima Alpa ha scelto di mostrare un video proprio, che è abbastanza esplicativo su cosa sia l'intoccabilità oggi, però vorrei chiederle di dire due parole prima. Ma prima di farlo mi soffermerei soprattutto, rivolto agli studenti delle scuole superiori che sono qua in aula, di fermarci un attimo a pensare cosa voglia dire il 60% della popolazione. 16% della popolazione. Vuol dire che il 16% che nasce, guardatevi intorno, il 16% è poco meno di un quinto della popolazione. Se nasci in quei gruppi lì, non ti trovi, o con molta difficoltà arrivi a trovarti a poter fare lavori più dignitosi, a poter anche avere delle aspirazioni diverse da quelle di fare i lavori più bassi e mal pagati che ci siano. Ma essere intoccabile non significa solo avere accesso a lavori peggiori, significa anche portarsi uno stigma nella vita di tutti i giorni. E allora chiederei se si può in qualche modo spiegare cosa significhi nella vita di tutti i giorni essere un Dalit o un Adivasi.
It's very hard to do that because, of course, yeah, we can only speak about the stories that we know from our research informants, our research collaborators, people who tell these stories. But one of the things, I guess, that we should also bear in mind, since there are, I think, also some students from comparative law here, is that India, in fact, has one of the most progressive constitutions, some of the most progressive policies dealing with discrimination. So at the time of the constitution, the making of the Indian constitution, the people who made the constitution recognized that, untouchability, tribal discrimination were major problems of Indian society. So the constitution was actually written by the person who led the writing of it was Ambedkar, who himself was from the Mahar Dalit communities. He had got law degrees from Columbia and from the LSE, where some of us come from. And he had gone back to write the Indian constitution. And what he put in place there was policies of affirmative action. So in universities, in hospitals, in gaining public sector jobs, a certain percentage of those jobs, of those places in universities, were to be given to Dalits and Adivasis, so in proportion to their population in the country at the time. So there are reserved places in India's universities which were given over for Dalits and Adivasis. So these things were recognized in the constitution. More recently, were laws put in place to prohibit violence against Adivasis and Dalits. So there is a Prevention of Atrocities Act, which is specifically focused on atrocities that take place against Adivasis and Dalits. So people who have experienced the stigmas of untouchability, of tribe discrimination, can take their cases and make claims on the basis of their cases, hold people to account. So this is what is there on paper. But as a result of this, what we have seen is, different kinds of processes. So there are Dalits and Adivasis who have gone to university, who have been educated. But there on the campuses, often there is a new form of discrimination that they experience. And what we find in the photograph that is shown here on the left-hand side, and that is represented in the hand, the big hand as you enter the university here, is a story of Dalit discrimination and the protests against it. And this was experienced by one particular case, by one particular man called Rohit Vemula, who was on the University of Hyderabad campus. And it's a complex story, and I'm going to hand over to Jens to speak about this story, and also the story of the Una beatings. But this is to say that even when you do well within the system as an Adivasi or a Dalit, you still face discrimination. And yeah, over to you, Vance.
Thanks. And before I do that, let me just try also to add to what does it mean to face stigma. Now, there was a big survey in 2011 that looked into conditions of Dalits and Adivasis, and there are some figures from that I think are quite telling, such as that 89% of Dalits cannot rent homes from non-Dalits. Non-Dalits will not rent to Dalits. Still a third still have, or around half still have no access to water from the same water source as non-Dalits. A third of health workers refuse to visit Dalit homes. This is serious discrimination, and in a sense, old-fashioned discrimination. On top of that, you now have in the so-called open job market discrimination. there have been academics doing surveys where they have looked at for top professional jobs, who gets interviews and who don't. And they can show if you have a name that is normally associated with you being a Dalit, your chance of getting interviews is very low. So there is discrimination across society. One of the postdocs that worked on our project showed how some Dalits that had managed to get decent, low-ranking jobs had to hide their names, hide they were Dalits to get that job. Now, does it get much worse if you have to hide who you are to get a job? And there's a long story around that. But so that's just to add to what stigma means, apart from the jokes you have to face and so on and so forth. But indeed, there are Dalits that get educated, because that is mainly because there are affirmative action in India. There are laws that enable a certain proportion of Dalits and Adivasis to get into universities and so on. One of them, still, of course, Dalits are overall poorer than all other groups, so it doesn't change much. But it changed something for some of them. Rohit Vemula was one of them. Rohit Vemula is the guy we see over there. He got into Hyderabad University. He was a Dalit. He was politically active in an Ambedkar association. He was being threatened by Hindu fundamentalist students. They managed to get the vice chancellor of the university to evict him and others from the hostels and ban him from access to courses. He committed suicide as a result of that, and a major political struggle arose from that. The hand we see out there symbolizes this. It is the hand. It is from Hindu myth, Hindu stories. This is the hand of Eklavya, a low caste or tribal person who was very good at bow and arrow shootings and who wanted to be trained in that. His teacher, when he realized that he was actually better than the high caste Arjuna, another major figure in Hindu mythology, asked for a teaching gift. Give me something in return. And he said, of course I will, whatever you want. And he said, give me your thumb, because without your thumb, you cannot shoot. The thought that a Dalit could actually be better at bow and arrow than a high caste was too much. So he had to give his thumb, and that is that is a symbol on discrimination against Dalits. Now, so that is the one picture. The other one is indeed a video. I'm not sure whether we can show it. We can simply run it in the background. This is a video. What has been going on in the past few years is that it has become common that people can attack Muslims, low-caste people that eat beef. They're so-called cow vigilantes. That is, it is not stopped by the government. There might be affirmative action in place, but vigilantes that enforce ancient rules about eating beef and protection of cow seems to be allowed. Here's a case of 4 Dalits that were skinning a dead cow and were being accused of having killed it in order to eat it, and they were being beaten up publicly. The police was actually standing by, nearby, allowing it to happen. The perpetrators were so pleased with what they did that they posted this video on YouTube. That shows something about what you can get away with. In the end, some people have been arrested and are bailed, but no one has actually been found guilty, even though the evidence is clear.
What's also important about these 2 particular cases is that Eklava's hand, the hand which is outside, appeared on University of Hyderabad campus as a form of resistance to show the persistence of Dalit discrimination. It led to huge student mobilization on the campuses of the university. Students got together to fight against the discrimination that was taking place. So that hand is a symbol of mobilization. It's a symbol of protest. These protests spread from the University of Hyderabad campus to many other campuses across across India, and we reproduce that, in London. And so, in a way, this is a symbol. It is not just a story of discrimination, but it's also a story of protest against that discrimination. The same with the video. The video went viral, and it led to mass mobilization of people against that form of discrimination. So again, this is a video of extreme injustice, but it's also a story of people rising up against that injustice.
E qui la domanda che vorrei fare a voi è: cosa vuol dire reagire nell'India di oggi? Quali forme di proteste, di reazione ci sono, se ci sono, e di organizzazione contro un po' tutti i problemi che avete esposto finora, sia dal punto di vista dell'emarginazione sociale, sia dal punto di vista della discriminazione e dell'emarginazione economica? C'è spazio per protestare in India oggi?
At great cost, but everybody is doing it everywhere. I think before we move on to the question of the forms of mobilization, because there are so many different things happening, it's important to also have something of the story of the Adivasis, which is slightly different, not always, to the story of Dalits. We've focused mainly on Dalits, but the other group, which is really important to the story of the modern Indian nation and the story of the work that we've been doing, are the Adivasis. So these are the groups which, as Jens said earlier, they've been mainly confined to the hills and forests of India. So they were historically seen as those people who had moved out of caste society, who had kind of segregated themselves off or were compelled to do so. And they lived amongst, they range from groups who were shifting cultivators, who cultivated the fields their fields to produce their own food and who hunted for their food, to people who started more intense agricultural labor, and to those who then live with multiple forms of livelihoods, which includes migration to distant lands as part for 8 months of the year, for 6 months of the year, so as a way of making a living. And these are the groups that in recent years have also been the target of extreme of this form of economic growth, because the lands under which they live are some of India's richest lands. So there is a deep wealth of mineral resources. So India's greatest iron ore reserves, its coal reserves, its bauxite reserves, lie under the land that are dominated, that historically were the lands of the Adivasi populations, the tribal populations. So with with economic liberalization, what the Indian government welcomed is multinational corporations to come in to harvest these resources. So now you name the big multinational organizations, whether it's SR or Vedanta or POSCO or Tata or Mittal, they're all there trying to enter these areas and gain access to these lands. Now again, as I said, the Indian constitution has been a very progressive constitution. It had protected these lands and ownership for them, for the Adivasis. So there are laws in place which basically say that Adivasi land can only be sold to another Adivasi. It cannot be sold to non-Adivasis. And these laws were fought for by Adivasis in colonial times. But what is happening now is a total undermining of these laws. So the government is just giving over land to corporations despite resistance that is coming from within. And these lands are also, the people who live on these lands have historically had huge rebellions against both the British government, who was taking their lands away in colonial times, but also more recently, through their mobilization in Adivasi land struggles, but also in armed struggle. So the Adivasi areas have been for the last 30 years or so the areas which have provided the foot soldiers for a long-standing communist forest insurgency in India, which has been going on for the last 50 years. So these are Naxalite, Maoist-inspired insurgents, many of who, the leaders come from high caste, intellectual, urban, often very well-to-do backgrounds, and they've been fighting, underground for almost 30 years against inequality in India. And what has happened over the last 30 years is that they headed to these forested areas of central and eastern India where the Adivasis live, and many Adivasis have had experience of joining them in some form or the other over the last 30 years. So what the Indian state now says is that all these people in these areas, no matter what their relationship has been to these insurgents, are all potential Naxalites. Now, this is an outlawed insurgency. They are called terrorists by the Indian state. So this has also given the Indian state the right to bring huge numbers of security forces, armed security forces, to surround these hills and forests, to start a massive counterinsurgency struggle. And human rights activists claim that what is happening in this area is actually in the name of fighting the terrorist. What is happening is a slow clearing of the entire population so that there will be the easy entry of mining companies into these lands, which otherwise the Adivasis are resisting. So there is and this form of discrimination which the Adivasis face is different. There are similarities with Dalit discrimination, but it is also different. They're seen as wild, savage, and barbaric, but the kind of oppression they're facing right now is really very much through the very hard, brutal force of the state, through the police, through the armed forces that are basically shooting down people and putting them in jail as Naxalites. And this is one of the most severe forms of repression that we are seeing in the country today. So against this repression, as you show in the next picture, I really would love to give Thomas and Itai, who are here with us and some of whose pictures are also here, a chance to say something about the Adivasis that they've worked with. So Thomas's picture, for example, is of the coal peddlers there. Do you want to say a few words, Thomas? Sorry, Itai, yes.
Hi. This is my photo. I did my research or fieldwork in Jharkhand in Central Eastern India, which is an area that is both very abundant in mineral resources and home to a whole range of tribal Adivasi communities. And coal mining operations in that part of India in particular have for decades been concentrated in areas inhabited by those communities and have brought about in the process dispossession of Adivasi land and displacement of whole villages. Whereas the potential benefits of mining, not only the energy that it produces, but also industrial jobs in the coal sector, have basically been flowing out of the immediate rural areas around the mines, where locals bear the brunt of dispossession and environmental degradation. So in the village where I did my fieldwork, for example, this Adivasi village where I lived for 18 months, it's located just next to a big state-owned open-cast coal mine. A very small minority of people in that village have actually managed to get proper jobs in the mine, while the vast majority of people basically have to survive by scavenging coal illegally from the mine, which is what we see in that photo, and scavenging coal and then carrying it to the highway near the village to peddle as a way to make a precarious living. And that's what is also depicted in the few other photos that you can see outside from that village.
Thank you. I, like Itai, have also done extensive field work in the Adivasi areas of India. The photo of mine is the one on the right, which is depicting a traditional form of agriculture, which we call shifting cultivation, which involves the cutting of sections of the forest on a 3 or 4 year basis and then burning the shrubs so that a mixed crop cultivation of maize, corn and sorghum can be grown interspersed with all sorts of different vegetables and lentils. And the village in which I did my fieldwork is in Andhra Pradesh, and all of the families in this village practice that kind of cultivation. There is in terms of the state development in this area, there is actually a huge hydroelectric project which is being built on the Godavari River, which is close to the location of my fieldwork. And I believe that the Invisible India team have actually got a documentary about this next month, a documentary by someone called Saraswati Kavala. And if anyone wants to find out more about that dam and the impact that it's having, I think it's being shown here next month. But this project is set to displace over 200,000 people. Most of them are from Adivasi communities like the Koya and Konda communities. And I suppose the important thing to remember about these projects is that they are often justified in terms of the benefits that they will provide to the population. Much like the economic arguments that were mentioned earlier, there is this narrative that assumes or projects that these benefits will filter down and be for everyone's good. Although in this case, as we've, in parallel to what we've heard already, the water that is kept through this dam and the hydroelectric power is not going to be of any benefit to people who have been submerged by the huge rising water levels in the area, who will be displaced from their villages. So I can pass you back to Alpa and Jensen. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is the time just for me to say a few more words about struggles? Because, of course, there are also lots of political parties that represent Dalits that have some influence now and then in different parts of India. Generally, very little, but they're there. There are many grassroots movements for Dalits that are very active and that where leaders may get jailed because they're active. For example, there's one called the BIM Army in northern India that builds schools, but also practice self-defense when Dalits are attacked, and therefore their leaders go to jail. There are lots of unions in India. Unions tend to represent workers, formal sector workers. So therefore they tend not to work much with Dalits and Adivasis. There are, however, many grassroots organizations, and there's a whole organization of grassroots organizations called the National Trade Union Initiative that deal with informalized laborers and therefore also with Dalits and Adivasis.
Grazie mille a entrambi. Visto che abbiamo ampiamente sforato il tempo a nostra disposizione, ma non così ampiamente, chiederei se dal pubblico ci sono delle domande. Io avrei ancora molte questioni su cui mi piacerebbe discutere, però credo sia più interessante se da parte vostra ci sono delle domande per Alpa, Shah e Jens Lerche. Se qualcuno vuole, io ho un microfono e posso girare.
Salve, allora io volevo fare 2 domandine veloci, però devo partire da una considerazione, cioè quando Ambedkar e gli altri padri costituenti hanno deciso di scrivere la Costituzione, c'era una grossa necessità in India, cioè quella di riportare, di far presente che c'erano queste discriminazioni, che c'erano fasce della popolazione che vivevano in un estremo stato di povertà. Quindi sicuramente c'era qualcosa di positivo nello scrivere in Costituzione, nel parlare nella Costituzione di schedule tribes o schedule castes. La mia prima domanda è, da un punto di vista sociologico, sono passati molti anni e quindi questo deve aver prodotto degli effetti. Secondo voi si può parlare in questo caso, da questo punto di vista, di istituzionalizzazione o legittimazione delle discriminazioni? La seconda domanda è relativa ai nostri giorni, e cioè sembra che questo governo ultranazionalista abbia legittimato, abbia voluto una cosiddetta guerra tra poveri. Stanno mettendo gli uni contro gli altri cristiani, musulmani, induisti in nome di questa Hindutva, ma soprattutto gli Adivasi e i Dalit di cui abbiamo parlato oggi. È emblematico il fatto che questa mostra evidenzi proprio come tra Adivasi e Dalit vi siano delle disparità, anche delle pessime condizioni in cui vivono. E quindi la mia domanda è, considerando che il cambiamento non può mai essere solo imposto dall'alto, quindi tramite le leggi, o provenire dall'esterno e quindi tramite l'intervento delle ONG, come si può riunire queste divisioni? Come si può apportare un cambiamento dal basso, secondo voi, che arrivi tramite l'unione, almeno a livello culturale e nei propositi di queste classi e fasce svantaggiate della popolazione? Grazie.
Well, these are two really, really important questions. So thank you for them. I think you know, the people who are fighting on the ground, many of them, apart from, of course, the underground armed revolutionaries who see even the Constitution as being a colonial relic, apart from them, there are many people who are still holding the Constitution as, you know, something that India can at least aspire to. But the sad story is that everywhere we see it being flaunted, you know, the rules are being subverted. So, I mean, this is not to say that it has not benefited many Dalits and Adivasis, the constitutional provisions, because there are the very fact that there are progressive Dalit parties, that there are progressive Adivasi mobilization, many of the people who are part of that have benefited from affirmative action themselves. If you look at their biographies, if you look at their life histories, so the people who are fighting on the ground for Dalits and Adivasis are themselves, you know, beneficiaries of those affirmative action policies. And I think we have to retain kind of faith in that, in those constitutional possibilities and in those things that are written into the Constitution, and holding that to account, the state to account to those responsibilities as one of the most important things that, you know, that we can try to achieve at this moment in time, despite it being you know, sidelined by political parties, especially the present government, left, right, and center. And the question of unification, I mean, this is also a really difficult question because, you know, you're quite right. I mean, there are so many struggles that are happening on the ground that are coming from so many different kinds of groups. But, you know, there are many Dalit political parties who are fighting, you know, in their own terms, you know, Dalit issues. There are Adivasi movements that are fighting Adivasi issues. Those themselves are also divided. You know, there are ones around one. There is in Jharkhand the famous case of the Netherhat firing range. You know, which was a protest movement against a firing range being built in an Adivasi area, and that movement had tried to unite a whole load of Adivasi groups, but then in the end that also broke apart because, you know, there were parts that were Christian, there were others that weren't, and they didn't want to, get together. But I think right now, this moment in time, that unity across the different oppressed groups is more relevant and more important than ever. Then there's also questions of violence. To what extent are we going to resort to violence as a means of protest? To what extent are we going to be Gandhian? How? At what points? Like, to what extent are these two polar positions also problematic in themselves? So there's this is the age-old question of unity across the left and across the oppressed groups that is more important than ever right now. And I think that if we had the answers to that, there would be, a really strong way out forward. So, but yeah.
Let me pick up a couple of issues. One is reservations, the affirmative action. It means much less today than it used to mean. It used to be so that Dalits and Adivasis could get jobs in government, reserved jobs. Now, because of the shrinking of the state sector, those jobs are practically not available anymore. So you can maybe become educated, but you cannot get jobs easily anymore. So it hasn't got the same value in that sense as it used to have. Other things have a lot of value, such as the Prevention of Atrocities Act, that there is an act that can be used by Dalit and Adivasi organizations to defend Dalits and Adivasis. They don't work by themselves. Police ignore any attacks on Dalits and Adivasis unless there are activists that run with it. But when activists do so, they do have a legal framework they can refer to. And that is important for activists, that they have that. So I bow to them, that is important. About unity, how can struggles be united? Here I think it's also important not only to blame the government, which indeed must be blamed, but also blame the opposition, including the left parties in India, who treat Dalits and Adivasis as workers, but not as Dalits and Adivasis. They do not see that they have demands. They rarely see that they have demands that are specific for them just because they are Dalits and Adivasis. And that is a problem, because that means ignoring them. For example, the leading left-wing party have no Dalits in its central committee. Dalits and Adivasis are 25% of the population. They're oppressed. Why are they not represented? There are problems there, as we also show in one of our stories out there, when the tea workers in Kerala went on strike for better conditions. They also went on strike against their own union, because their union, according to them, were working together with the tea plantations against the interest of the Dalit workers. And that was a communist union. So yes, I have no easy solution, but the first part is to recognize that there are certain groups in India that are not accommodated within the most existing political groupings.
Grazie mille, penso che i punti toccati siano molto importanti. C'è un'altra domanda?
Ma non lo so, si parla di modello economico, tutto molto bene, ci sono delle organizzazioni che reagiscono alle ingiustizie, c'è una bellissima Costituzione e tutto quanto, però sono decenni che questa situazione continua e non fa che peggiorare, e mi sembra che il grande assente da questo dibattito di oggi sia il governo, cioè la responsabilità del governo, che invece di occuparsi di queste cose, di mettere in atto le costituzioni, le leggi e di farne di nuove, va esattamente contrario. Cioè, poi è quello che insomma si è anche detto, però non è soltanto un laissez-faire, una politica del laissez-faire a livello economico, ma è anche un creare le condizioni per questo disastro economico, ambientale, sociale. L'India è un paese che avrebbe avuto delle potenzialità straordinarie, e invece siamo di fronte a questa situazione, che è una situazione probabilmente irrecuperabile. Ora, vogliamo parlare delle special economic zones, ad esempio. Cioè, ci sono delle leggi che creano queste cose, non è semplicemente qualcosa che viene... Cioè, sono state create scientificamente le condizioni per questo disastro. perché le persone non fossero tutelate in nessuna maniera, ma anzi il contrario, perché i delitti ambientali non esistano, eccetera, eccetera, eccetera.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Of course, it's the government. You know, it is the government which brought the policies of economic liberalization with which we have now got increasing inequality. It is the government who is bringing those forces that you see here. You know, these are the forces that are there. These are the government forces which are surrounding these Adivasi areas. It is the government that has beaten those Adivasis in that picture, claiming that they are Naxalites. It is the government which is trying to clear those areas under which lie the mineral wealth, which the government wants to give over to the multinational companies. So the government is totally responsible, and it is a huge part of the story that we wish to tell. Without the government not doing the deeds it's doing, we wouldn't be in this place, you know. But what the government is now doing is also completely shrinking its responsibilities. It's saying, as Jens said, you know, it's the public sector is now, you know, really being rolled back. It's the private companies that have taken over the field. There is no affirmative action in those private companies. It's the private companies which is bringing their own security forces to surround their own mining companies, along with the government ones which are first clearing the land. So yeah, it's not happening just, you know, through the corporate sector by itself, but it is the two in hand, of course. Yes, you're totally right.
My good colleagues at JNU, the University in Delhi, talk about the low road to development and say that is what India is going through as opposed to the high road. So as opposed to seeking development through the development of its population, it seeks development by squeezing its population as much as possible. I think that is true. There are differences as well, and one should be aware of that. There are differences in different states of India. There are differences between different governments over time. There are some states in southern India where there are degrees of social policies in place. Not enough, but they're there for some groups of workers, for example. For example, for construction workers in Tamil Nadu, there are certain pensions and social security systems in place, for example. There are differences between the governments that the Congress government from 2000 and in the early 2000s that depended on the votes from the left parties that put in place the social law that's called the National Rural Employment Guarantee that guaranteed work to poor people across India at the minimum wage. It wasn't implemented properly, but it nevertheless worked well enough to lead to an increase in rural wages because it influenced the rural labor market. The present government is starving that for funding. That is not their interest. The present government is going very strongly for cheap labor and for uniting people on a Hindu fundamentalist agenda as opposed to an agenda that gives poor people something. That is not what they seek to do.
Io, se non ci sono altre domande, direi di chiudere, che siamo molto abbondantemente fuori orario. Ricordo soprattutto agli studenti universitari che sono in mezzo a noi che domani ci sarà un seminario, continuiamo il discorso a discutere con Alpa, Shah e Jens Lerche alle ore 9:30 in sala lauree qua a campus. Ringrazio tutti per la partecipazione e il coinvolgimento, soprattutto un ringraziamento speciale alle classi in fondo. Di che scuola siete? Colombato. Grazie mille per la pazienza, grazie e l'interesse.